Luther King.
Yes.
And we need to understand
Kwame Ture,
Topeka Michael. We need to appreciate the fact that here was the father of Pan-Africanism. Not really the father, one of the important people.
Yes.
Coming and playing an important role in the 1960s, right? Past the prime of his life. And he is very critical of the American civilization, and he's no longer praising the popular culture.
Okay.
He has moved away from that now, and he's looking more at it on race relations. And I feel from the 60s to the 70s, he's judging the American society no longer on culture. He's now looking at it more as these things erupt in the Black Power.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this book.
Okay, yes.
Negro Americans Take the Lead.
Yes.
In this book, he is examining some of the early incidents in the 17th, 18th, 19th century of important blacks. Right? He's looking at slavery, he's looking at their role in the early 20th century, and I always see this as a sort of a follow-up to American civilization. You cannot read American civilization and not read this, and you realize that a lot of things in this book should have been in American civilization. You know, this is where he sort of focused on the role of the working class blacks, the important role that they were playing in America, and they remain unrecognized, and they remain still a dispossessed people. What else?
Yes, that's a very important point to make, and I think for that reason maybe James didn't want American Civilization published. They were just his private notes, and they were published posthumously.
Correct.
Yes, and
I know. Yeah. Go.
Yes, we shouldn't be too hard on him. I think the context in which he wrote the popular culture essays.
He didn't get a chance to revise it.
No, and he didn't have a lot of library in the detention in Ellis Island.
Yeah.
So, and also the fact that he was trying to make a case for why he should not be deported, by perhaps using Pecan to praise America even while being critical of America. Maybe that was what happened. So.
Probably, yeah. I'd be surprised.
Yes, but let's move on to his contributions to educational sociology of education. And I'm really interested in his idea that we should not see education as something that happens only in the classroom, but something that happens out there on the street as a people organize to achieve a goal, that they are being educated.
I think that is a very important point, and I think James develops this. Now, he also influenced Walter Rodney.
Yes, he
as
did.
you know, Rodney was a student of James.
Yes.
And I think Rodney also demonstrated this. Remember in Jamaica, he would go out there into the rural communities and speak to the Rastas.
Grounding, yes.
And he also in Guyana, his WPA, he was always for the people. So Rodney learned a lot from James. Taking education to the people.
Yes.
People who couldn't afford a university education, people who couldn't go to college, people from poor families. James was out there giving them lectures, right? Often not charging them at all.
Okay.
I believe that this is one of his most important contributions, the sociology of education, that a lot of people have tended to just overlook. A lot of people have failed to realize that what James was doing, he was taking the ordinary person and publishing a book about them. He was taking an ordinary issue like cricket and putting it on a larger scale and adding colonial dimensions and political dimensions. And this is what his contribution is. His contribution, just as V.S. Naipaul would take the ordinary person in a rural village suffering from their little phobias and things and create something grand out of it. James took these normal little people, as in Minty Ali.
Yes.
You know, and he brings them on stage, and he also addresses problems that these people face. He didn't just talk about them and gloat over them and say, look at these poor measly people. I think his contribution was that he made the lower class, the working class person, feel that he had potential, feel that he was more important. And a lot of times what I've realized is that a lot of the groups that he was in, like the Facing Reality and even Drum and Spear Bookstore in Washington, these people were more interested in disseminating knowledge, disseminating literature, ensuring that people got James' ideas and people were aware of what he was trying to do. He was educating these people from the ground up. Yes, he had a little teaching job at the university, Federal College, I think in the 1960s, but James was somebody who was interested going into homes, going into neighborhoods, and sharing his ideas, sharing his knowledge. You might remember, you might be aware of that when he was in Trinidad, a lot of time he was in the public library giving lectures.
Yes.
A lot of time, this sociology of education also encompassed the trade union movement. He wrote articles, not for academic journals that would be limited in subscription. He didn't write for newspapers that was so-called elite and status quo, like the Port of Spain Guardian, Port of Spain Gazette, or the Trinidad Guardian. He wrote for a few articles of his went to the labor leader, Captain Cipriani's paper.
Yes.
He was somebody who was aware of the Negro world, Marcus Garvey's paper. He was somebody who teamed up with George Padmore and brought out International African Opinion. He wrote in newspapers, small journals and things like The Keys, Labor, Militant. So this was somebody who consciously and specifically chose journals that would reach the working class, that had a circulation outside of academia, that had a circulation that was beyond intellectuals. And I think a lot of people don't often appreciate that. James, it's not that his writing was bad, his writing was excellent, but he deliberately chose to spread his knowledge among those who needed it. And it reminds me of the biblical times, New Testament, with Jesus Christ. Jesus didn't stay in the temple with the rabbis. Jesus went out there and he preached to the people and he healed those who were sick. Similarly, James, like a Christ, was out there offering hope, healing those who needed. He left the temple, he left the college, the university. He gave up his teaching job at Curiosity to go out there and spread the knowledge. And he would say, I would say, on a global scale. He didn't just stay in the Caribbean. He moved to the United States. Remember, he met Trotsky and things. So here was somebody who was interacting with leaders, influencing Nkrumah, influencing his childhood friend George Padmore. Somebody who was not just influencing leaders, who was influencing the working class, the masses. Somebody who influenced Eric Williams. He knew Eric Williams in England. A lot of people say he even helped Eric Williams with his famous PhD thesis.
Yes,
right?
that is true.
So what I want people to understand in this contribution to education, it is far-reaching, it is wide, it is appealing, and you have to remember it was done in an age without technology like the internet. It was done in an age where not everybody had a radio and a television in their home, as today in Trinidad. So here was somebody who was on the ground. He was in the trenches, literally, spreading that knowledge, often at great risk. Even when his health was bad, here was James still agreeing to go on the BBC and give a talk on Nkrumah. Here was James saying yes, he will come to speak to some student association, some African society, be it at Cambridge University or Essex University. He was somebody who was willing to put aside all his writing appointments, all his speaking engagements, to come to speak to somebody who wanted to know a little bit about Marx, a little bit about Trotskyism. So this, I feel, is his contribution to the sociology of education, something that you cannot really pinpoint, something that you cannot say, well, his contribution was only in literature. He was in study groups, he influenced leaders, and as I mentioned, he influenced Rodney and a whole generation.
Yes.
Bukareni, the whole New Beginning movement,
Yes.
Franklin Harvey, all these people influenced.
Yes.
Tony Bogues, Henry, you know.
Yes, yes, that's a very interesting overview of his sociology of education. And the tape is just coming to an end, so I'll wait for the next tape before we continue.
Right.
A very interesting view, given the way he critiqued Rodney for taking the organizational thing too far, too quickly.
Yeah.
That I think the most important critique was that Rodney did not study the taking of power before he went into attempting it.
Yeah, he was too hasty.
Too hasty, yes. And I think he wrote something similar in the 40s when he was commenting on Lenin's notes on the dialectics. He says something about Lenin understanding that with his knowledge of dialectics that he shouldn't get excited and go and start making the revolution by him. We were talking about the sociology of education before the change of tape.
Right.
And I'm really intrigued by James' critique of Rodney, when I would have thought, like you said, that Rodney was a disciple of James, practicing what James preached.
Yeah.
And in that sense, isn't it more of a critique of James that his organizational, educational practice didn't go far enough, in the sense that he was not really engaged with party formation and party leadership during the bulk of his life? He was actually campaigning against the idea of having a party formation, which some would consider perhaps a blunder for somebody who is talking about organizing for power.
Right.
Parties have not been less important since James's time. In fact, they've become more important. And you might not like certain parties, but dissolving all parties or arguing for the withering away of the party as a solution to political organization, to me appears a little naive, but I can understand why he makes that point. And again, it is a contribution from his Caribbean roots that he was coming from. For example, most of the things that have happened in the Caribbean, educationally or otherwise, did not come through any political party. The Calypso movement, which he eulogizes with Big Birdie, Mighty Sparrow, yes. The reggae movement, the Haitian Revolution, the movement of African Americans in America, the vast bulk of historical interventions by the people, not just people of African descent, but worldwide, did not come from a political party. The way we study anything, be it calypso or soca or reggae, to train to become an expert in it, does not go through writing books, but through practice, through
experimentation.
Yes, self-organization. Yes. So he was arguing for that spontaneity as a principle that he took from Hegel, since he read the notes on dialectics. And I thought he was taking Hegel a little too far by starting with that critique of party organization and ending with that critique of party organization. And I know he was critiquing a specific kind of party, the Stalinist Bolshevik party, but he took it too far to rejection of all all party organizations as being perhaps an undermining of the power, the collective power
and democracy
of the people to self-organize. I don't know what you think about it.
You touch on something very interesting that a lot of people have explored, but they have looked at it more from the Marxist, Stalinist / communist Trotskyite movement. They have looked at it from the left. His political leanings, they have tended to look at it more from the left issue, but they have omitted James' political involvement in Trinidad, and his political involvement tended to contradict a bit what he believed in. And his first real political involvement was with Eric Williams and the PNM, when he was the editor of The Nation, and he was involved in the Federal Labour Party and thing. Yes, James had a problem with the way Williams was organizing the party, but James should have realized this before he joined the PNM. He should have understood the party structure that he didn't like, and he was now joining an organization of a party that he had contradicted before. James fully well knew that it was based on one person. It was a one-man show revolving around Eric Williams, this great academic with his PhD, who the masses had rallied around. So the PNM in its early days lacked, even though it's to call it a well-oiled machinery, it lacked the organizational structure that James talked about in the 30s and the 40s, and that he wanted. So I find that was a bit contradictory and ironical that you're joining the PNM and you know fully well it lacked that structure that you talked about from Stalinist days and Marxist days. But I feel that it was more a friendship, a personal friendship, that brought James back to Trinidad. He knew Williams when they were in England, and he came back here to see what his former student from Curiosity days, his former student from England had achieved, just as Nkrumah had achieved something. But I feel also what a lot of people didn't realize is that in his lectures, which he published in Modern Politics, he talked about events like the Hungarian Revolution, the workers and the proletariat coming together, the spontaneous uprising that you talk about. It didn't have any party. It didn't deal with any trade union. It was two classes coming together. And James in those lectures talked about, he said politics shouldn't be something separate that you have to take time off from work to get involved in. Politics should be done in the office. It should be done in the factory. So just as I was talking about earlier in the sociology of education, he is bringing education to the masses. He believed politics should be discussed and practiced among the masses where they are working and where they are living. You shouldn't have to wait for the evening to go and listen to a politician speak. They should do this at their workplace. And this, I believe, is what James was trying to preach in 1965 when he formed the Workers' and Farmers' Party. He was trying to create a structure, a party structure that was a bit class-based, because the very name Workers and Farmers showed that it was dealing with the lower classes, but he was trying to create a structure where politics could be brought to the people, the grassroots. And again, sadly, just as I said earlier, how our culture, our civilization, Caribbean civilization, never appreciated black Jacobins. We never appreciated Workers and Farmers Party. It was soundly beaten by the PNM and the DLP, which formed the opposition. So you see, this is why James always felt discouraged with Trinidad. He felt a little hurt by the Caribbean. Here it was, he was around the world preaching about politics creating change, about the need for organization, political organization. He's coming down in Trinidad, trying to make it materialize, trying to create a structure, and it is being rejected by the population. It is rejected by his own Trinidadians. He loses his seat in Tunapuna, where he was born. So I find it very strange that he's coming down here, this man so well respected with ideas on political organization, and he has problems building a political party. And the only reason is because our structure, our party politics, in the 60s as it is today, is based on race. We do not deal with issues like the environment and abortion and the gay issue like United States, where somebody, a president on one of those issues could lose the election. We are still divided between Indo-Trinidadians and Afro-Trinidadians. So I believe that if James had gone to a country with more of Afro-Caribbean people, like maybe Jamaica or Grenada, he would have had a more impact, a greater impact. And if he had gone to society where that intellectual leader wasn't present, like Williams, he might have had a chance there. But this, I feel, was one of the reasons for his failure of his political party. And later on, he became involved with the ULF, United Labour Front. He was in contact with David Abdullah and Rafiq Shah, but he was more on the margins, on the sides. And again, this is a working class party. This is a party emerging from the OWTU, just as the Workers and Farmers Party. And again, the ULF fails to defeat the PNM. So we see James again being disappointed. And I believe that James is beginning to realize that Trinidadians are not appreciating the ideological need for political organization, the importance of political organization. And you talked about Walter Rodney earlier. I believe James is disappointed that Rodney jumps into something that has racial implications with Chetty Jagan and Burnham. James is disappointed that Rodney hasn't influenced and educated the public in Guyana about the need for organization as yet. Rodney hurriedly jumps into the political fray, believing that he could do what Eric Williams did. You know, but you see, what I feel James failed to realize was that the Caribbean, the trade union model and the political model played an important role in other Caribbean societies. We had Bustamante and Manley in Jamaica. In Grenada, we had people like Sir Eric Gary. Gary was a member of a union, a leader of a trade union. Even in Barbados with Grantley Adams, Verburn in Antigua, all these political leaders had their base in trade unionism. So trade unions were seen as a springboard, a platform to get into politics. And James realized this, but he couldn't do it properly. And the reason is that we were divided along racial lines. Could you imagine a party formed with OWTU hierarchy, Workers and Farmers Party, people like George Weeks, the ULF with people like David Abdullah and Lennox Pierre? They are forming these parties, and their members, the Afro-Trinidadians, are voting PNM. It is so sickening to see the working class voting for Eric Williams, and Eric Williams has passed oppressive legislation, the Industrial Stabilization Act in 1965, and Eric Williams is keeping wages down, keeping salaries down, bad working conditions, just like colonial days, and we still see the Afro-Trinidadian working class rejecting the Workers and Farmers Party, rejecting the ULF, and voting for the PNM. So this is the ethnic cleavages, the racial cleavages that James didn't appreciate. He was trying to tell these people, for God's sake, you all vote for a party that will create change. Vote for a party that will offer you something. So it was very, very strange for a lot of James' friends, for a lot of people who knew James, to see that James was being rejected politically in Trinidad, because a lot of people don't realize that we were divided along racial lines when it came to politics. So no matter what the PNM and the DLP said in their manifesto, no matter what they preach on that platform, when it came to the polls, it came to voting, it was along ethnic lines, as it would be today, 2007, and has been in the past. Even before Eric Williams in 1956, race played a very important role, and I feel James should have appreciated that. He spent too much time abroad, and a lot of times people didn't know James. So a lot of times here he was on the political platforms, speaking to these uneducated people, people who never went to high school, about Greece and about Plato and Socrates, and it was over their heads. He was never in touch with what party politics was in Trinidad. If he had spent more time here, he might have been able to say, as our people say, work the system. He might be able to win an election.
Yes, I think that point you just made, he admitted in one of his lectures on leadership, where he made a point I never thought of before, that Lenin was a nationalist intellectual, that everything Lenin wrote was about Russia.
Right.
He applied Marx to Russia. If you read Hegel, he's applying it to Russia.
Yeah.
But and then I say, how about you, CLR? You know, you seem to do the opposite. Though I'd never thought of Lenin that way. I always thought Lenin was also an internationalist.
Right.
However, do you therefore think that CLR could have achieved more success in educating the people, his sociology of education, if he had stuck it out instead of forming a party just for the 66 election? If the party had stayed on the ground and he had stayed with the party, that maybe people would come around to understand the message he was trying to send across politically and educationally.
You brought up a question which is very interesting, a question which I have also been toying with. And I have been seeing that you would know Bastille Pandey.
Yes.
Bastille Pandey was one of the members of the Workers and Farmers Party. He lost the election in 1966, but he stuck it out and eventually became Prime Minister. He won the election with UNC. So I feel that James could have stuck it out in Trinidad, and who knows, he might have really won an election, or he might have won his seat.
Yes.
But you have to remember that James is somebody on the move. James is somebody who sees the world as his stage. James is somebody who is disappointed and he goes away where he's appreciated. Similarly, think about George Padmore.
Yes.
If Padmore had stayed in Trinidad, he would not have been well respected. A lot of countries and a lot of states in Africa might not have been liberated as early as the 50s and 60s.
That's true.
So it was very important for these people, black personalities, to go out there and spread their ideas. So I wouldn't hold it against James that he left us, but I also know that James's intellectual capacity, it was much appreciated abroad, and it was better well received abroad. If he had stayed here, he would have become frustrated. His writings might not have been attracted any attention, and I feel he would have ended up a frustrated, broken man. So I feel that, yes, to a certain extent, maybe he could have stuck it out, stayed in the trenches, keep on losing, but he would have deprived the world of a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. He would have lost a lot of people who he trained. There might have been no Walter Rodney, you know, there might have been no George Padmore if he had decided to remain here in Trinidad from the 30s. But I feel we also have to remember too that it wasn't just Trinidadians who left. Marcus Garvey went to the United States and made it big also, you know, spreading his Pan-Africanism and nationalism. So I feel we need to understand that the Caribbean